And now is the opportunity, ma'am, to enter a plea of either guilty or not guilty. How would you like to reflect your plea?
Your Honor, on behalf of Mrs. Daybell, she enters a not guilty plea to both charges and a request for a pretrial and a jury trial.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. On this Christmas Eve, wherever you are in the world, I hope you are healthy, I hope you're safe, and I hope you're with people close to you. For me, this has already been an enjoyable Christmas, even more enjoyable than other years. I guess mine is coming from quite a low standard. I have sometimes allowed Christmas to go by without even celebrating it. And I don't have any decorations in my house, although previously I have had, but this year I didn't have any. And I think when you don't have high expectations, you can just enjoy the simple things in life, like a meal with a family member that you haven't seen in a while. So a simple thing like that I'm grateful for, and I'm sure some people who are used to lavish Christmases, used to big crowds and parties, this will be boring, dull, and frustrating, and so on. I'm just saying that there's another way to celebrate Christmas, which is quietly and with, in a kind of an intimate way. I don't necessarily mean with a loved one. Of course, you can with a loved one, but you can also celebrate Christmas in a sort of modest way, and it can still be enjoyable. It's a time to catch up. It's a time to reflect. It's a time to enjoy being together, sharing time together. And, the stuff that goes around that, how important is that really? Now, before I get into the Laurie Vallow case, I'm going to just give you a little bit of a preview of what to expect in the next episode of John Benet Ramsey, episode 15. This is dealing with, obviously, December 24 years ago today, and we're going to retrace John Benet's steps through that day, where she went, who she visited, what she was doing on Christmas Eve. And it's quite an interesting episode, I can tell you that already. Something else just to mention, the paralegal that pleaded guilty after leaking Letitia Stork's murder case affidavit has taken a plea deal for kind of a lesser charge than first degree official misconduct. But that 32-page affidavit was what allowed me to write Boy Interrupted, the murder of Gannon Stork. And so I'm actually quite grateful that the affidavit was leaked. You might think that that's a questionable thing to say for someone who cares about honesty and true crime, but you've got to bear in mind that in that particular case, that affidavit referred to events that were superseded by, I think, a subsequent affidavit. So in other words, that affidavit came out, as far as I recall, I'm talking about it was written before Gannon's remains were found. And so it was, if it was going to be another situation like the Patrick Frazee case, it was going to be very, very difficult to write a book about the Stork case. And it was important, and I find it is important as a writer to try to write about cases in real time as the events are unfolding, because otherwise amnesia sets in. You forget about contextual things like the weather, how hot or cold it was, what was going on in the world at the time, what was sort of trends and all that kind of thing. Anyway, in this episode, we're going to deal with something that I haven't seen anywhere on YouTube, certainly not in the media. Maybe I missed something. Maybe you guys saw something, and if so, well, then I stand corrected. But as late as August 2020, just a couple of months ago, there was an article just saying no murder charges have been filed in the Laurie Vallow case. It was sort of like, well, when are murder charges going to be filed? And then actually as recently, or in terms of that particular news item, on the 1st of October, Prosecutor Robert Wood interviewed Laurie Vallow's sister, Summer Shiflett. So on the 1st of October 2020. And it's a 14-page transcript. You can actually go and read the transcript on Scott Reich's blog or website. I can put a link to it in the description if you guys like. Well, probably will do that. But I'm just going to highlight now about 2 or 3 parts from that page, starting on page, I think it's effectively page 3 or 4. But it's essentially where the transcript starts. And Prosecutor Rob Wood is talking about, and it sort of just breaks in the middle of nowhere. So he suddenly is talking about of the ones kind of running down the kids' case because they were last seen in Rexburg. That's how it sort of starts. But in the very next statement that he makes is that we are going to be filing conspiracy to commit charges for both Chad and Laurie. And I believe that those charges would have been filed already if the trial was going to commence on schedule, on that original schedule, meaning in January. Remember that schedule? And so you might ask, why on earth would the prosecutors hold back these important charges? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons for it. And I'm obviously speculating when I say this, but I would say the reason is to catch the defense sort of by surprise, right? And I, as I say, I could be wrong about that. And the other thing is for the prosecution to give itself the maximum amount of time to gather evidence in terms of their case. And so this interview with Summer Shiflett, Laurie's sister, is exactly that. It is part of that process of just trying to strengthen their case, right? Now, the reason why I say, them telling the defense about this kind of at the last moment to sort of wrong foot them, the reason why that probably is not the case is because in this transcript he talks about we've already told the attorneys. In other words, they know about this already. So Robert Wood says to Summer Shiflett's lawyer, Garrett, we are not shy about that. We've told both attorneys. So that presumably means, well, he says his attorney keeps pretending like I've never said that. But presumably Chad's attorney knows that the prosecutor intends to charge or accuse his client of murder. And Laurie's lawyer, the same thing. And they, as he says here, his attorney keeps pretending like I've never said that. And he says, what? But we have to. But I kind of want to give you like a little bit of background of where we are and kind of like our kind of theory of how this ended up where it was. We know that this is not the same Laurie everyone else knew. What's so strange to me is everyone we talked to knew Laurie before this. She was a primary president. She made quilts for these kids. She made everything fun. Everyone loved her. She loved everyone. And Summer, sort of, bear in mind, her sister sitting there, just says kind of very, almost in a muted way, just responds, great mom. And then Wood goes on to say, great mother. That's what everyone says. And so one thing I'm going to ask of you to consider is maybe something happened. I don't know what. I don't know if it was psychological. I don't know. I don't know if we'll ever know. But something happened, and I think Colby, the way he said it to me, I kind of think is the person who is in that jail, he said, is not my mom. It's someone else. And Summer answers, yeah. Now I'm going to go back to the transcript, but I just want to respond to this because it's actually incredible insight, not only into what Wood is trying to do, but into Laurie, potentially. And what I mean by that is, it's almost like the same thing with Chris Watts. You've got this other side to Laurie, meaning the perfect Laurie, the Laurie, the good mother, Laurie that everybody loved, Laurie that was so kind, Laurie that was so giving, Laurie that made things fun, and everything had that sort of appearance that everything was fine. And this is from a lot of people. It's not just from one or two people. Lots of people saying the same thing, and you kind of get the sense that perhaps Laurie, like Chris Watts, found herself in a role either that she'd created or that she felt society expected of her, but nevertheless she found herself in a role and then no longer wanted to be in that role. She wanted a different life, just like Chris Watts wanted a different life. So in other words, she was in a fairy tale, or what appeared to be a fairy tale, certainly to everyone else, just like with Chris Watts. But for her personally, it was becoming a cage and eventually kind of a nightmare, and she wanted to get out of that. And the fairy tale that she saw beyond the nightmare she was in kind of perpetrated a nightmare on other people, potentially, just in terms of this kind of reasoning. The other thing that I think is worth thinking about is one of the difficulties that prosecutors are faced when taking a case to trial is you can, let me put it in a kind of a colloquial way. They say you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink, right? I actually heard another saying recently, a blind squirrel will find a nut. Have you heard of that? That's a little bit of a different meaning though, but which means something like a stop clock will strike the right time twice in a day. Anyway, I'm diverging from the point. It's just that you can go to all the information in a trial. You can show all the evidence. And there's so many cases where that is the case, where I've seen it happen. O.J. Simpson, Casey Anthony, Oscar Pistorius, Henry van Breda, and you could probably even say it of Chris Watts, although to me to a much less extent. And the thing is, you could have all this evidence showing that this person did something, but what the jury want to know is why. Like, why did this person do this? And that is, the defense is probably their best card at this point. In terms of if they are charged with this, they haven't been charged officially of it yet, as far as I know. And probably if the charges are filed, they'll be filed very late, like at the last minute. But the point I'm trying to make is, if the case goes to trial and this accusation is made, the best card in the defense's pocket is that, well, why on earth would she do this? And that is the problem the prosecutor's got to solve. And it's helpful to go and speak to people very close to the suspect, in this case her sister, and find out what kind of person was she, how did she think, how did she act, what was the sort of change in her behavior. And this is the key to solving true crime cases, also solving the trial dilemma in terms of motive, which is, what are the dynamics behind this crime, beyond the evidence and all that kind of thing. What are the dynamics behind it? And something that's become popular in the law of late is that you don't have to prove a motive. It's not a legal requirement to prove motive. You just have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think a lot of lawyers make the mistake of not trying to figure out the motive themselves. Because I've seen it time and time again, certainly in South Africa where there aren't juries, I've heard the judges say, but why would he do this? And if the prosecutor can't answer it, it doesn't mean that his case is insufficient. It's just in a human way. We also want to fill in connect those dots. And if the prosecutor hasn't even figured that part out for himself, then he may be in trouble. Not always. I mean, I've seen convictions without motive, one of them being triple axe murderer Henry van Breda. There was no sort of motive given. even when the case was finalized and they sort of asked, why did he kill his parents and brother with an axe? The prosecution couldn't say. No one could say. Even the media talking about it couldn't say. I felt I could say, and I thought it was pretty poor of all the coverage that people weren't trying to figure that part out. Why? It's the central question in true crime. It's a central question when a case goes to trial. And if it's not the central legal question, certainly the question uppermost in the minds of jurors. And that is why it's so important to answer that question, to address that question, to acknowledge that question, to figure that question out as far as you can. And that's also why we've needed to do that with the Chris Watts case. I think a big thing missing in the John Benet Ramsey case is also why. So whoever you think is the perpetrator, you've got to have a really good reason, a big treatise really, to say, why did this happen? Why did this person do this to this beautiful little girl? And I think there's already an answer in just those words, beautiful little girl. So coming back to this transcript, and I'm not going to read much further. I'm really only on the first or second page of 14 pages. If this video is received well, I might go into some more detail, but I certainly will be covering the Vallow case in a lot more detail next year. But anyway, so what Rob Wood wants to get from Summer is some sense of Laurie, some sense of her transition, some sense of this other Laurie that emerged, this Laurie behind the mask, right? And he's saying, was there some kind of psychological shift? And I think he's right. I think her spiritual beliefs had a psychological impact. I think it's silly not to imagine that. But the question is, what is the mechanism of it? How did that psychology play out, right? So the prosecutor says, on the flip side of that is, and he says, I shouldn't say flip side, he says, I want to be clear. I'm not going to pull any punches on any defendant in this case, right? I've got my job to do. Summer says, absolutely. So what he's kind of saying there is, I'm not going to go easy on your sister. I've got to do my job. And this is almost saying to Summer, you might feel sorry for your sister, or you might want to defend her, or you want to stand up for her. But the situation here is, I've got to prosecute her. And her saying absolutely implies that Summer may be on board, but we'll see. Then Rob Wood says, we also want truth and the whole truth and the context of it, exactly what I've been saying. And then he says, and Chad Daybell, did you ever meet Chad? Summer says, so I met him once at Preparing People. I went to one Preparing People thing. Wood says, okay. Summer says, and with my mom and husband, I went to support Laurie, and she wanted to support Mel. So we went and met Chad, and he talked for like 90 seconds maybe, if that. And then he called me when Laurie got transferred to the Idaho jail. He texted me and said Laurie wanted to talk to me. And I was like, yeah. And then the second I hung up with her, he called me and asked me about bail. Wood says, Summer says, for Laurie, so I've talked to him maybe 3 times briefly on the phone. Never a long-ended conversation. But the first thing he said to me when he called me was, he said that Laurie hasn't told me very much about the kids. So there's not really much I can tell you about it. And Robert Wood says scornfully, okay, of course he said that. And then Summer says, Wood goes on, welcome to Chad Daybell. Summer says, I have my own opinions on him, don't get me wrong. The prosecutor says, I bet you do. He is highly manipulative. So we're getting a bit of an insight into what the prosecutor thinks of Wood. Summer says, yes, he is. Wood answers, I'm not going to say he's highly intelligent, but you don't have to be highly intelligent to be highly manipulative. And I think that also applies with Chris Watts. I think that also applies. Summer, absolutely. Wood, he is extremely manipulative, and your sister manipulated him in some ways too. But the context for everything that happened came from Chad. Absolutely, Summer answers. So that again is a great insight. I must say, I'm also working on a narrative on this case, and I feel almost stung that I didn't get the word in first, because the question is, where's the manipulation coming from? If there is manipulation, is it coming from the one or the other? And the other question is, who is the ringleader here? Who is the leader? And what is the context for this scenario? And we know that it's all happening within Chad's sort of divine design, that sort of cultish design. And I think that tells you a lot. But on the other hand, Laurie's had how many husbands? Chad's her 5th husband. So if she's manipulative, it's manipulative in another area. Agreed. Summer is totally on board with this. She says absolutely. And she says absolutely, I think this is the 3rd time she says that. What worries me a little bit here is that up until this point, Summer's not saying very much. The prosecutor is doing most of the talking. Anyway, Robert Wood says, we have enough evidence to prosecute him, we do, but the case against your sister, is stronger. I just kind of want to give you that background. That's the kind of context that we see this guy came in here and, not making excuses for anyone, but kind of blew up the situation. And he did not care who died. Summer says, The prosecutor says, who got hurt? He did not care at all. And the other thing I can tell you is your sister truly believes that everything she's done has been done in righteousness. Summer says, I know. Wood says, I know I'm kind of using LDS speak. And Garrett says, yeah. The lawyer jumps in and says, yeah. Summer says, 100%, that's my interpretation. I think she 100% believes. And Wood says she believes it. Summer, Prosecutor Wood, every once in a while you'll see a kind of little crack in like a jail phone call, but, and then Summer says, you've heard our conversations too. I get that she's not fully aware of what she's really done. Wood says, right, yeah. Summer says, I don't think she is. Wood says, yeah, I'm going to say this. I think she knows what she's done. Summer says, she knew enough to lie to us about it. And so this is quite an interesting area where you say how much, it's again a parallel with the Chris Watts case, how much of what happened is demon possession or whatever you want to call it, some kind of religious intervention, some kind of where you lost your mind because some religious idea took over you, and so you're not responsible. What's responsible is the demon or the religious idea. So let's put that on the stand. So let's imagine this religious idea is this sort of like almost like a virus. Can you extract that, put it in a test tube, and put it on the stand on trial? I mean, obviously, don't be ridiculous, but the point is, when someone has these two different lives, it's easy to imagine that they didn't really know what they were doing. They weren't conscious what they were doing. They didn't know between right and wrong. And in other words, give them an excuse, especially when you have this whole thing of everybody loved them. But that whole everybody loved them is part of why they think they're going to get away with it. Because no one would suspect them, because everybody loves them. Because nobody knows about this other side to them. And if they lie about it and they keep up appearances, no one will know about that side. So we're sort of halfway through the transcript. I'm not going to go much further except to say where he says, this case, we need to understand the context of who these people are. And so that's a lot of what they're going to be asking about. Summer says, okay, I'll do my best. And so anyway, this is where the prosecutor says, that's a lot of what they're going to be asking about, meaning Chad's lawyer and Laurie's lawyer, probably in trial, right? And when she says, I'll do my best, it does suggest that she's going to try and help the prosecution. But she is a prosecution witness. And we know at this point, the prosecutor is, when I say he's in trouble, I just mean that he's facing a charge that he was coaching this witness. Does this seem like coaching? I think you've also got to ask what is happening in the private conversations between the defendant's lawyers and their clients. What are they talking about? What they're going to say at trial? What do you think? Anyway, the prosecutor says, I said it won't be easy. I know it's going to be a hard interview. Someone says, I was wondering if you would be willing to if you're able to tell me if there's any progress in what you know about Tylee and her death. But is there any progress on her autopsy where you can understand better? And I'm not going to take it further than that. Again, thank you for listening. If you are someone who's not having a very happy Christmas, if you're feeling lonely, if you're feeling like, wow, this is a time to be happy, and I've realized I'm not very happy at all, and this is wrong, and this is not right, and and you're feeling it all building up on you. I've been there. But just remember that it's sort of like Christmas is sort of one of those days where you suddenly ask yourself, am I happy? Do you ask yourself that on any other day? So don't take it personally. Also, it's the same on Valentine's Day. It's the day you ask yourself, am I in love? Does somebody love me? Do you ask yourself that on any other day? On New Year's Day or Old Year's Day, you sort of say, Happy New Year. Do you really think there's a lot to look forward to in 2021? I'm just meaning compared to the ordinary. And I don't really think so. I think 2021 might be quite a tough year. I'm just saying, lower your expectations, get back to basics, keep things simple, baby steps, and make the world smaller into something that you can handle, something that you can take on. And yes, it is, it is making your experience smaller, but it's also making you more effective in the context that you find yourself in, and not overwhelmed by the size of unknowns that are beyond your control. Does that make sense? Anyway, I wish you well, whether you're happy or sad, whether you got what you wanted for Christmas or not, and wish you also a very realistic and authentic 2021 that is going to get you where you should be going in terms of your life and your goals and your values and your priorities. So that is my wish for you guys. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.